But remember the word coincidence. In mathematics, it's a term that defines angles that coincide. And in mathematics, two angles that coincide are said to be angles that fit together perfectly. And we have taken a term that means something that fits together perfectly and interpret it to mean that is something that fits together and shows up accidentally or in chaos. But actually, anything that is coincidental with something else is a fit that is perfect. And there are no accidents in this universe. When you begin to access a power, you start to have an awareness that it's absurd to believe that in a universe which has an intelligence behind it, that an accident could show up. Everything is a part of the perfection of it. Everything. There are no accidents in this universe. You came in when you were supposed to, you'll leave when you're supposed to. The children that came through you or didn't come through you are all part of that perfection. Questioning it, challenging it, all it does is keep you from accessing the ability to manifest and attract into your life what you really would like to have when you begin to question it. And when you ask, now the question always comes up when I talk about these kinds of things is, well, if there is a force, and this force is a part of the perfection and there are no accidents, at what point do I have a free will? And am I making any of these decisions? And Jung answered that question brilliantly. He said, at the same moment that you are a protagonist in your own life and you're making choices, you are also the spear carrier or the extra in a much larger drama. You are doomed to make choices. And that paradox is something you have to live with. Yes, you are making choices. Yes, you have the capacity to attract into your life virtually anything you want. And yes, there is an intelligence into which you can connect that can access virtually anything you put your attention on. And yes, it's all part of the perfection of the universe. Yes, both of those things you have to live with at the same time. You have to transcend those dichotomies. But I want to speak just for a few moments about what happens when you leave ordinary levels of awareness and you leave these lower energies. When you leave the energy of the solid, where all of your problems occur, when you leave that and move into this energy of spirit, wherein you only have love to give away, as I spoke about earlier, where your response to sadness is always a higher energy of joy, where your response to doubt is always a higher energy of faith, where your response to hatred is always the higher energy of love. When you practice what Francesco taught us in that very famous prayer attributed to St. Francis, what happens when you reach these higher spiritual energies is that you start to access something in which you can see it coming. And you get outside of yourself, as I just spoke about. And that is called intuition. And that intuition is available to you, that you can practice it virtually any time in your life, but you've got to get out of these lower and slower energies because it's not accessible there. It doesn't exist there. Problems exist there. Fear exists there. Worry exists there. Guilt exists there. Hatred exists there. Anger exists there. These are all lower and slower energies. And when you listen to the 10th principle, you'll see that they're not just lower energies, but they weaken us whenever we access them and whenever we use them. But when we get outside of them, we start to get out in front. And now I suggest to you, brazenly, that you don't have to have accidents in your life. That you don't have to be a victim of crime in your life. That you don't have to live in a world of scarcity in your life. You don't have to. If you're willing to take responsibility for whatever acts of crime have come your way without guilt, if you're willing to, and just say, I own them, they're mine, I've attracted it for some reason. If you're willing to say, I have had these various accidents and I've attracted that into my life, I don't understand why, but I know that it's mine. If you're willing to say that I've attracted the wrong people into my life, people who have abused me and victimized me, and I have taught people how I'm willing to be treated, and I'm no longer willing to do that, and so I'm going to send out a different attractor energy. If you're willing just to take responsibility without guilt, I underline it. I don't want any letters, okay? I underline it. You do not deserve any of it. You have not been punished for the things that have happened in your life. You just own them. They're yours, because you can't get past them if you're waiting for something outside of you to change. You get past them by taking responsibility for them. Then what happens is you start seeing an accident coming. And many of you have had that experience. When you are in a higher frequency in your life, and you have an intuitive sense that, I know it's a green light, but I think I better stop. You know, a lot of heads nodding up and down. And something tells you, whatever it might be, something tells you, I better stop and slow down here. And zoom, there goes somebody through a red light, and you stop and you have that feeling that goes through you. You go, what was that? What was that? And you know when you can access that? When you're close to God. When you're in fear, you can't access it. We all have this idea that the reason I'm not getting where I'd like to be, particularly with young people and working with young people over the years, it's because my parents want this, or my parents think that, or my parents won't let me do this. And I always said, well, but why are you so attached to what your parents think? Well, these are my parents, and I have to do it. I said, you can listen to it, you can take it in, but you don't have to embrace it. You don't have to live by that. And certainly when you become adults, when if there are people out there who convince you that you should or shouldn't be doing this or that, then you're going to continue to attract exactly what it is that they have their attention on. So if you put your thoughts on what they want for you, you tell everybody else about how it makes you go from being blissed to pissed just by being in their presence, just by being on the telephone with them, that person, that in-law, that mother, that father, that grandparent, that child, that whoever it might be, is giving you, or even your neighbors or your friends or whomever, your coworkers, are telling you what you should or shouldn't be, and you don't like the advice that they're giving, and you resent very strongly. One of the 10 secrets for success and inner peace says there are no justified resentments. Your resentments are things that destroy you. So if your thoughts are on what they want for you, and what they want for you is something you don't like, you will continue to attract more of and use the attractor energy of the universe to attract more of what they want for you, even though you are upset about it. So here you go. There are 4 things that you can't do with your mind if you want to move into this state of intention that I'll be speaking about tomorrow. And these are, you cannot put your thoughts on what's missing, on the circumstances of your life, on what you always have been, or what others want for you. So you have to learn to do a somersault into the inconceivable and only put your thoughts or your attention on what you intend to manifest for yourself.
I include here what my great teacher Lao Tzu wrote in the Tao Te Ching. When the greatness of the Tao is present, action arises from one's own heart. When the greatness of the Tao is absent, action comes from the rules. Live your life in accordance with a Tao-centered or God-realized point of view. You know what is right, what your heart tells you. You know that you don't need cumbersome rules laid down by others, some of which make no sense to obey at all, to guide you. But the rules should never be a final factor in determining anything about yourself. Instead, these wise men ask you to go within and be guided by what your passion dictates, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else, of course. If you have a tendency to employ the excuse, "The rules won't let me," know that it was handed down and enforced by those who wish to control your behavior. Yet here again, it's important to take full responsibility for your own actions. You're no longer a child who needs rules to make sure you're safe, healthy, and functional within a family or a classroom. Be willing to consult your adult sense of what's right for you. Assertively pursue that vision, keeping a silent vigil on your inner passion. Overlook the pressures to do things by following instructions and edicts that are simply no longer applicable to you.
Every thought that you have is an energy. Everything in the universe is an energy. And when you have a thought that is a thought that weakens you, which Hawkins speaks about so brilliantly in Power versus Force, that thought, the 10th secret in 10 Secrets says, wisdom is avoiding all thoughts which weaken you. And thoughts change and make you strong or weak depending upon whether or not what you're thinking at any given moment. That everything in this universe is an energy. Energy is in everything. And here's one of the most powerful notions about how you move into this area of bringing higher energy to the presence of lower energy in your life to strengthen rather than weaken you. It was on the wall of the ashram where Mother Teresa lived. And it goes like this. If you want to know tonight what to do and what to think and how to bring this energy to you, there is nothing that you can't do when you shift your energy from energies that weaken to energies that strengthen. And this is what Kent Keith had written and what Mother Teresa lived by. She said, people are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. What you spend years building, someone may destroy overnight. That's particularly relevant in America, isn't it? Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today, people will often forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give the world the best you have anyway. You see, in the final analysis, it's all between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. And the intention that I have for this is, it is my intention to express the genius that I am. I love that Buckminster Fuller once wrote, everyone is born a genius, but the process of living de-geniuses you. It does. This source is an expanding source. It's a forming power. You have to be a forming power. You have to be in a state of expansion, a state of seeing yourself in the same way that this universal source sees you. You are a genius. Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge. More important than knowledge. He also said something very powerful. He said, all I want to do is to learn to think like God thinks. All the rest is details. It's just details. How much time do you spend in your life on the details? This program is about learning to think, feel, and sound like your source, like source energy. So you have to pay attention within you to all of your inner thoughts that have any doubt in them. Hawkins talks about this in Power versus Force, that everyone that is labeled a genius has something called radical humility. They don't brag about it. They don't talk about how great they are. They just know that they came from a source and they came here to do something. And to me, I have people that show up in my life who think that because I can get up in front of an audience or because I can sit down and write, that this makes me a genius. And, folks, if my car doesn't start, I open up the hood and I'm looking for on, off. Hoping to find a switch in there. That's just, because otherwise I am completely challenged when it comes to fixing things. And I want it that way. I encourage that, all right? I don't want to be spending my energy fixing screen doors, and I've made that really clear. So I just manifest screen door repairers in my life. The way that you stay with this field of expansion is that you align with the spiritual energy that is really the genius from which you originated. You are a genius. One of the most important things that you can do is look for the genius in others. See it in everyone, in everything that they do, and remind them of that. I have 8 children. Every single one of them is a genius in their own way. Every one of them. One of my daughters is, who you'll be hearing in a few moments, is a genius when it comes to taking the microphone and singing. One of my daughters has such power in her ability to get on a horse and to take little children and to show them how to ride a horse. And she looks with her long, flowing blonde hair when she's out there, and she takes these little children, and she just touches my heart, and it's so powerful. And she knows that this is her purpose. Her purpose has something to do. She can't ever stop thinking about anything that doesn't have something to do with horses. Every paper she ever had to write in school has something to do with that. She's her own little genius. I have a son who is who's a surfer, and who's also made up his own language. He speaks a language that he and a few of his friends can do. And I have a brother. My brother David is the same way. He created a language when we were 13 and 14 years old, and I still speak it today. And nobody else understands anything about it whatsoever. If I say Clodopole, Dipeka, or the Beatty Banal, only my kids will know what I'm talking about. There's not a person in the whole country. My brother Dave watching this, he'll know what I'm talking about. That's a genius. All of my children have this in one form or another. And each and every one of you have that as well. Don't let life de-genius you. You came from a source that creates perfection.
Your creative impulses are real, they're vital, they're worthy, and they crave expression. The fact that you can conceive of them is proof of this. Your thoughts are real, they're pure energy, and they're telling you to pay attention and get that connecting link to the power of intention polished up through living at different levels than you've accepted as normal or ordinary. At these levels, everyone is a genius. Appreciating the genius in others. Every person you interact with should feel the inner glow that comes from being appreciated, particularly for the ways in which they express their creativity. A core theme which strengthens the flow of the power of intention is wanting for others as much as you intend for yourself. Appreciating the genius in others attracts high levels of competent energy to you. By seeing and celebrating the creative genius, you open a channel within yourself for receiving the creative energy from the field of intention. My 16-year-old son Sands has a unique way of riding a surfboard unlike everyone around him in the ocean. I encourage him to do what comes naturally and express it with pride. He also created a unique language of communication similar to my brother David, which others in the family and close personal acquaintances emulate. Creating a language that others use is the work of a genius. I tell Sands this, and my brother too, whose unique language I've spoken for over half a century. My daughter Sky has a distinctive, one-of-a-kind singing voice that I love. I tell her so and point out that this is an expression of her own genius. All of my children, and yours as well, including the child within you, have unparalleled characteristics in many of the ways they express themselves. From the way that they dress, to the little tattoo, to their signature, to their mannerisms, to their unmatched personality quirks, you can appreciate their genius. Notice and appreciate your genius as well. When you're just like everybody else, you've nothing to offer other than your conformity. Take the road of seeing the face of God in everyone you encounter. Look for something to appreciate in others and be willing to communicate it to them and anyone who's willing to listen. When you see this quality in others, you'll soon begin to realize that this potential is available to all of humanity. This obviously includes you. Recognizing genius in yourself is an integral part of the dynamic. As Dr. Hawkins tells us in Power versus Force, until one acknowledges the genius within oneself, one will have great difficulty in recognizing it in others.
Genius and simplicity. Begin to realize the intention of this chapter by uncomplicating your life as much as possible. Genius thrives in a contemplative environment where every minute isn't filled with obligations or hordes of people offering advice and insisting on your constant participation in ordinary mundane endeavors. The genius in you isn't seeking confirmation from others, but quiet space for its ideas to blossom. An uncomplicated life with fewer intrusions tolerated in a simple setting allows your creative genius to surface and express itself. The simplicity establishes a link to the power of intention, and your genius will flourish.
The purpose of dancing at a dance floor is not to get to someplace else on the dance floor. Your purpose isn't to end up over here. Like, this is where we're going to end up. So all of this other stuff is irrelevant. Our purpose is to get here. We don't do that. When we dance, we enjoy every single step of the dance, all of the music. And wherever we end up is where we end up. It's just like enjoying a concert. I mean, the purpose of enjoying the concert isn't to get to the end. If that was the case, then the people who conducted the fastest would be the best. And people who wrote only finales would be considered geniuses. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, that was fantastic. You see? It's like peeling a banana. You know, the purpose isn't to get to the other end. It's to enjoy every bite. And the same with life. If we, self-actualizing, fully functioning, highly spiritual people, the great teachers are people who didn't do what they did because they were going to make money off of it, because they were going to be approved of, because it was going to be enduring. They did it because it was what their heart told them they had to do. They have no investment in power or control over others. Their life is not about who I'm better than. See, true nobility is not about being better than somebody else. Everybody's better than somebody else at something and not as good as somebody else at something else. True nobility is about being better than you used to be. It's about growing in your life. That's what nobility is. And highly functioning people they're not looking into other people's lives. The last line of Candide, Voltaire's great novel, this whole story of this wanderer, Candide, this great teacher and sort of comic person. The last line, I guess we'll have to learn to cultivate our own garden. Cultivate your own garden. If other people want to grow rutabagas and you want to grow cabbage, then allow that and be independent of that. But so many people live their lives through what others are doing, how well they're doing it. Fully functioning people let go of that. That they have incredibly high energy and enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, entheos, the God within. When people say to me, what makes a great speaker? I said, be authentic and be enthusiastic. And it doesn't matter what your content is. People will love you if you're authentic and enthusiastic. If they can see the God within you. If they have no concept of failure. There's no such thing. If you take a golf ball and you put it up on a tee and you stand there and you swing at the golf ball and it dribbles off to the side, you haven't failed. You've produced a result. The question is, what do you do with the results you produce? Everything that you do produces a result. You can call it failure and say, well, I'm not good at this, I've never been very athletic, and apply all kinds of labels to yourself. But we should never, ever allow ourselves to think of ourselves as failures, nor should we ever place that label on anybody else, because you can't fail. It's just a judgment. The only difference between a flower and a weed is a judgment. It's just a judgment. And the difference between success and failure is just a judgment. You know, Edison, the great inventor, of course. You know, when asked the question, he had tried 25,000 different ways to invent a battery, and he still didn't have it. And finally someone said to him, how does it feel, someone of your stature, to have failed 25,000 times? He said, failed? I don't know anything about failing. He said, today I know 25,000 ways not to make a battery. What do you know? And every time you do something, every time you go, and it doesn't work, you learn something. And the question isn't whether you failed, it's what do I do with the results I produce. If you pick the golf ball up and put it back on there and say, all right, I'm going to correct that, and you do it again and again and again, eventually, if you go through the 4 pathways, if you practice the discipline and the wisdom and the unconditional love, eventually, when you surrender, you'll know how to hit a golf ball. But you'll never do it the moment you label yourself to be a failure. And as we move up from 10,000 cycles per second on your emotional health, we move through the various symptoms of neurosis: worry, fear, anxiety, stress, tension, self-rejection, until we get to a point at point B where we are experiencing an absence of symptoms. However, we know that at any moment, one phone call or one piece of news that is not consistent with what I expect, it's called dissonance. This cognitive or emotional or affective dissonance could literally create in me a state of immobility. So the right phone call or the right action, or somebody having an accident, or somebody not doing what I think they should, or somebody even saying something to me that I dislike, or whatever it might be, and I could instantly go back into 18, 16, 14, and perhaps even 12 and 11 and 10,000 cycles per second. It's been discussed that chronic depression is something that affects as much, I've heard estimates as high as 20% of the population. That people are consuming things like Prozac and antidepressives at an alarming rate. And it's intriguing because there's no such thing as depression. I defy anyone to go out with a container and bring back any depression. The world is just the way it is, and there's no depression in it. There are only people thinking depressing thoughts, and then those depressing thoughts affecting our chemistry, our physical makeup, to a point where we become immobilized. There's no stress in our world. The world is the way it is. There are only people thinking stressful thoughts, and those stressful thoughts become our reality, our detachment from our source, our separation from our source. We start moving away from our source rather than toward it. And as we move in the opposite direction of our source, we find ourselves breaking down, being emotionally immobilized, upset, fearful, anxious, and so on. Now, as I move to my right, on this scale of emotional health, we reach a point called point C. And at point C, at 100,000 cycles per second, we understand the meaning behind Terry Cole Whitaker's title of her book. What you think of me is none of my business. That is, I am living here at a state not in which I am unaffected by, emotionally, the things that occur in my life and in the life of those I love and I'm around, but that I cannot become immobilized by them. I will not allow myself to lose my sense of balance, my sense of connection to God, because of what someone out there might do, even if that someone is very, very close to me, the closest person in my life. I am independent of the good opinion of all of those around me. This is 100,000 cycles per second. Illustrative of it is a story that is told of the Buddha. And everywhere he went, he had all of these followers, but he also had people who were critical of him. And these people would find fault with him, and they would say things about him that were insulting, and they would be very inflammatory, and they would be extremely critical of him. And every time that they would behave in these ways towards the Buddha, he would respond with love, with kindness. That's all he could ever say, And one day one of his students said to him, "I just don't understand. For days and days, these people have been so critical and so ugly in their reactions towards you, and always you still react with kindness and love. How do you do that? How does that work?" And the Buddha responded with something that I think is very, very relevant to our lives. He said, if someone offers you a gift, and you do not accept that gift, to whom does the gift belong? And that was his answer. If someone offers you a gift of their hatred, of their criticism, of their bitterness, of their tension, of their fault-finding, if they offer this to you, but you don't accept it, to whom does it belong? Why, it's theirs. And the Buddha was saying, why would you ever choose to allow yourself to become depressed, upset, immobilized over something that belongs elsewhere? It's not yours. You don't own it. What you think of me is none of my business.
As you listen more closely to your sacred self and transcend your ego, so too will the world ego be shifted away from power, control, and money, back to the basic virtues of higher awareness, back to peace, beauty, love, purity, tolerance, patience, and compassion. This does not mean that the benefits of technology cannot be enjoyed. It means that the ego will not be the motivating force in our lives. What we truly are as a people is a force that craves peace and simplicity. We want that deeper awareness that comes with the sanity of the higher self. It is insane to continue believing that we are a collection of tribes, each with a separate identity and a special mission. It is insane to believe that anyone who does not fit into our particular tribal mentality is a potential enemy. We know that there is not a separate God for each of us, or even for each of our tribes. We know that there is a universal divine intelligence that flows through all of us, and in that sacred space within us, we are all one and the same. We know that the best within us is love, kindness, and compassion. Yet our egos, both individually and collectively, have campaigned long and hard to promote a false idea. How sane is it for people to be killing each other over disputes that ancient egos created long before we arrived? How sane is it for us to believe that some of us deserve to eat the food that God provides, and that others do not deserve it by virtue of their geographic location? How sane is it for us to pump up our youth with the philosophy of the free ride by leading them to believe that if they want something, they deserve it? How sane is it to show our children pictures of violence as entertainment and allow them to adopt the ego belief that it is human nature to hurt others as a way to defend a right to be special and separate? As our higher selves begin to triumph over ego in the daily decision-making of our lives, we will truly be making progress on the path of the sacred quest for all of humanity. You must banish all doubt about your ability to facilitate such a quest and begin to know that you are both the microcosm and the macrocosm. There is a universe within you, a unified field of all possibilities that you can reach as you become the compassionate witness. Be silent. Shut down the inner dialogue. Most important, transcend the false self that we call the ego. That is when the healing will begin to occur. The world ego is destined to be restrained as more individuals look within and consult the higher part of themselves. The doubts are vanishing, and the spiritual revolution is well underway. Moving toward an egoless world is not some far-fetched idea, any more than the disintegration of the Iron Curtain was a far-fetched idea. To those who heard such talk a few years before it happened, it did indeed seem absurd, but ideas, thoughts, and inner knowings are powerful instruments for the disintegration of the false self. One of the simplest and most powerful ways of doing this is taught by Eknath Eswaran. Writing in his book Meditation, he advises us to spend 30 minutes every morning in meditation repeating the prayer of St. Francis. In saying this prayer, we both transcend the ego and invite the sacred self to guide us through the day. I invite you to join me in this daily prayer as we share the path of the sacred quest. The prayer of St. Francis goes like this. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in dying to self that we are born to eternal life. If you have the same knowing about your world, dramatic changes will take place as we collectively put to use the greatest force in the universe, the force of love.
When enough of us as a people begin to think in certain kinds of ways and we reach a critical mass, then all the rest of us begin to align that way. And the same kind of changes that take place in the history of humanity in one place take place all over the planet at the same time. And as people begin to think this way, that the spread is not a physical property, that it's an invisible property, that indeed we are all connected, but what we're connected with is not something that we can get a hold of. As Deepak always says, quantum physics is not only stranger than you think it is, it's stranger than you can think. Because indeed, what it does is it shatters the illusion of our separateness. So that if enough of us begin to believe that something is intolerable, and we really begin to act on that and think that way and create that, because collectively the same thing is true. The state of your life is nothing more than a reflection of your state of mind, and the state of the world is nothing more than a collective state of mind. It's a state of mind. We act collectively on what we think about.
The idea of having a quiet mind. When I first started practicing meditating, which I encourage people to do, not from any Far Eastern guru loincloth kind of thing at all, but as a way of understanding that there's another dimension. If I were to take you, the listener, and to put you in chains, and to put you in a dungeon, and to deny you light and human contact for the rest of your life, you would probably say to yourself, this is the end. This is the end. I can't handle this. There are some people, believe it or not, among us, who, if you were to do that very same thing, would say, this is a beginning. There's a whole world there. If any of us were forced to learn how to go into that world, we would discover many, many, many things about ourselves. And I'm talking about the world of the mind. It's not an accident that all of the great spiritual masters have encouraged a kind of meditation of one kind or another, and that most advanced people, most awakened people, practice it on a regular basis. It's not an accident. You begin to discover how slimy your mind is. The thoughts that you have all the time, and how much disasterizing we do with our minds, and how much stuff that we occupy our minds with that is so unnecessary and so silly, so foolish, so destructive, that quieting our mind and meditating really go hand in hand. Now, meditating doesn't require a lot of training. It doesn't require somebody teaching you exactly how to do it or whatever, because that defeats the purpose of meditating. When you meditate, you really want to go in there and quiet your mind. And what you want to be able to do in your life is to have an open, but not a rampage going on inside of your mind, not 1,000 thoughts barraging it. And these thoughts that you have, these are yours. These are your creation. I used to tell people as a therapist, if you don't believe that you're in control of your thoughts, then I want you to tell me who is. Then I want you to find all those people who are in control of your thoughts and send them all to me. Then I will treat them, and you will get better, which is absurd. Obviously, you're not going to get better by treating somebody else. You are the creator of thought, which means that in some metaphysical way, you're the creator of your life. Thought originates with each one of us. But most of us have trained ourselves to believe that whatever we think just sort of happened, and thoughts just sort of, I call it the pop-in theory, you know? They just sort of pop in, and I can't help it. Boop, there's a thought, and it's just there. And I can't help it, it just happened. That isn't true when you train your mind. We spend so much of our energy training ourselves in all kinds of areas. We train ourselves in business. If we're going to get a new computer system, we go out and we spend millions of dollars in a company, and we train people how to work it. And we want to become good at golf or swimming or tennis or backgammon or anything that you can think of. We know that we got to go out and we got to practice and we got to train ourselves. We train ourselves, and we ignore our mind, which is 99% of who we are. We just completely ignore it. Like there's no training available for our minds. And we can all do that. I've really learned how to do it myself. No one ever taught me. You know, when I used to teach at university, I taught in Berlin for half a year. There was 70 students in the class. And I would have the first student introduce themselves and their name. Then I would have the second student introduce the person who was just introduced and himself. And each time I would repeat it. And I'd have the third student introduce the two that he had just introduced plus himself. And we do that for the whole class. By the time we got to the 70th student, they had to introduce everybody in the class by name, and I would then repeat each one of them. And I just had a very simple technique for doing that. It was just like concentrated effort on making my mind remember 70 people's names in an hour and a half. Now, I wasn't doing it to waste an hour and a half. This was a class on teaching people how to identify neurotic behavior in people. And it's like what I wanted to do was to teach them that they could do things with their minds, just like their patients do, that they never thought of, that they never even dreamt were possible for them. 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, they would have like 80, 90% recall. And by the end of the fourth or fifth week, everybody knew everybody's name in the class, and they had all trained themselves. And most people go out there and they're introduced to somebody, and they say, hello, my name is Wayne. They say, what would you say your name was? They can't remember one person's name in 1 minute. And they think that, oh, I have a poor memory. But it's because they don't train. Well, the mind can be trained, and meditating is a perfect way to do that. And there's a wonderful world in there, in your mind. Quieting your mind means that you're no longer susceptible to all of the external influences that are around you. I'm always amazed when I watch the U.S. Open tennis championships that are played in New York, right near LaGuardia, at how the players are able to continue playing with jets going on overhead. And yet, when I am really completely involved in a tennis match, I've had people where I've played, I've had jackhammers going next to me, and my opponent is going crazy. They have to go over there, and I tell them, I don't notice it. My concentration is on the ball. And I don't hear that lawnmower going off or the jackhammer going or the airplane going on overhead. We can train ourselves to do that. The people who are really good at any game or any activity that requires concentration know how to do that. Well, we all want to be able to be better at that, and we don't want to have our minds occupied, particularly with worry and anxiety and stressful kinds of things. So you have to learn how to focus your mind, how to get focused, and keep yourself from creating those kinds of thoughts that are always impinging on your consciousness. Miracles are available there. You talk about surrendering. I meditated for a long time. It's like there would be a light. I would have this light that I would create. And it's really interesting that you can create a light with your eyes closed in a dark room. So you don't really need your eyes to create light. You need your mind to create light. Your mind can create light. And all of us do it in our dreams. We can create a color in our dream without any light. So that our minds are capable of producing that. And our minds can create smells, and we can create sounds. We do all of that in our dream. And that's just a pure thought state. So what you want to do is get to that pure thought state.
There was a man who, his name was Francesco. And we named the city of San Francisco for this little monk. He gave up all of his worldly possessions. And he provided us with a message. Remember earlier I said Einstein's observation that all of us, everybody else is concerned with details. All I want to do is learn to think like God. Do you see what he meant now? Can you see that? He wants to think and sound and feel like his source. Well, Francesco, who later became known as St. Francis of Assisi, a place where I've visited many times and feel a very deep and powerful connection. The words to that I'd like you to play over and over again. The words to that are very powerful words. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is sadness, joy. It's not a prayer. It's not a religious statement. It is a beautiful technology for teaching us to bring the presence of higher, spiritual, divine, organizing intelligence to the presence of every energy that is not of this source. Every energy of hatred, anger, fear, worry. And we need it in the world more than we've ever needed it before. I'd like to suggest to you that when you learn to connect to intention, as I've been discussing here in this program, that something will happen as you go out into the world. You will find that your presence Your presence will do things to other people, even without you being aware of it. When you are at this level, one of the things that happens is you begin to instill calmness. We convince others by our presence, said Walt Whitman. People will feel calmer when they're around you. You ever be in a group of people where you instantly know that when you're around them, it just feels good. You feel better about yourself just for having been in the room with them? That's what will happen. And there's also people who, when you're in the room with them, you want to run away because they bring very low energy. And people say to me, you know, other people are always bringing me down. I'm working with it. If you knew what my family was like, if you lived with the people I live with, you wouldn't be saying these kind of things. And I say, low energy people can never bring you down. You have low energy because you hate people for hating you. You get angry at people for being angry at you. You judge people for judging you. You join others in their low energy. What did Sky just say? Make me a channel of your peace. Don't send me peace. Francesco didn't say, I need some peace. I'm short of peace. But this is only peace. It can only provide. Make me a channel of this. Allow me to be this. Your presence, when you connect to intention, to the field of intention, as I've been describing it here today, your presence makes other people feel energized. They want to do more. They want to write. They want to create their music. They want to make Mr. Holland's Opus. It's like, who doesn't love that movie? And it isn't because it was such a great movie, which I think it happens to be, but it was because everybody, every one of us has that in Rocky. How many people saw Rocky? Remember Rocky by Sylvester Stallone? And you walk out of there, and you might despise boxing, but you go, there's a Rocky in me. We all feel, you walk out of there, you just feel like, it's like your presence makes others feel connected and uplifted. Your presence makes others people feel purposeful. It inspires them to greatness. And there's also an impact that you have on the consciousness of all of humanity. In Power versus Force, again, Hawkins speaks about what happens to us. What happens to us when here we have in this room probably 1,000 or more people in this beautiful, majestic theater in Boston. Just by your being here, just by watching this program and taking on some of these ideas, you change the energy of the entire planet. Everything is connected to everything else. The Native Americans used to say, no tree has branches so foolish as to fight among themselves. We're all branches on a tree called humanity.